Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great interview and a video for you tonight. We have our Hemp News segment we'll be starting out with in just a moment. Some interesting news from Oregon and around the country. We have an interview with Alison Draisin, a therapist who is in Oregon this weekend at the Oregon Cannabis Science Convention. And we have a 16-minute video with Roar Mikkelsen in Oslo, Norway, talking about developments there and their upcoming protests. You know, we are recording this on Tuesday the 18th. So the big cannabis day of April 20th, 420, comes on Thursday and the show premieres on Friday. So we're a little ahead of the game, but the video from Norway talks about 420 in Oslo. So we'll talk some more about that a little bit later. But first off, let's bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from right here in River City, the home of our TV show, Portland, Oregon. A survey found that Portland, Oregon is the best city in the United States for cannabis. Portland earned the top spot due in part to the affordable cannabis prices in the city, where an ounce of high-quality cannabis costs about $110, about $206 less than the national average of $316. The survey found that an ounce of high-quality cannabis in Washington, D.C. cost $589, more than 87% above the national average. Portland also had the second most dispensaries per 100,000 residents at 13.7, which is nearly 4.5 times the national average of 3.1. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma had the most dispensaries with 48.7 dispensaries per 100,000 residents. Oregon's per gram cannabis prices have fallen 16% from last year to $4 a gram at the start of this year, according to the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission's 2023 Recreational Marijuana Supply and Demand Legislative Report. The prices in the state are now at an all-time low. The agency found that the total quantity sold of usable cannabis increased in both 2021 and 2022, but the OLCC described the increase in 2022 was 2% and just 1% in 2021, compared to a growth rate of 27% in 2020, the big pandemic year. The quantity sold of concentrates, extracts, edibles, and tinctures, on the other hand, declined in 2022. Because of the diversity of products in the market, it's difficult to do an apples-to-apples comparison of quantities sold from one year to the next. The agency notes that the state saw a sales increase from 2020 to 2021 from $1.1 billion to $1.2 billion, but decreased to $994 million last year in 2022. The monthly sales last peaked in April of 2021, the agency said, but have declined every month since, except for a spike in August of 2021. According to the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Controls Report, the abundant cannabis supply in 2021 and the declining prices throughout 2022 placed cannabis businesses under severe strain. Despite lawmakers placing a moratorium on producers and retailer license, the OLCC said the number of producers and retailers are now at their highest levels ever. While the moratorium applies to new licenses, some applications eligible last year had been first filed back in 2018. The agency said that while the number of licenses continued to rise last year, the number of active businesses continued to decline. The OLCC said in the report, quote, "The Oregon recreational marijuana market has repeatedly shown that it is like any other market except for one important respect. And it's unique in another. Like other markets, it's responsive to market signals and ramp supply up or down depending on demand. Unlike other markets, however, the federal status of cannabis means that Oregon is what has been termed a, quote, market in a box, end quote. Supply must stay within the state's borders despite its strong comparative advantage in national cannabis production. At the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Control Division, weeks after the resignation of Oregon's top cannabis and alcohol regulator, Oregon's Department of Justice has announced it'll investigate officials who allegedly diverted inventory rare bottles of Kentucky bourbon for their own use. Earlier this month, Oregon's new governor, Tina Kotek, asked the head of the state's Liquor and Cannabis Control Commission to step down, and last week, the State Department of Justice announced it's opening a criminal investigation into OLCC officials who allegedly diverted scarce bottles of Kentucky bourbon for their own use. The practice has allegedly been common at the agency during the entirety of Steve Marks' tenure. In his February 13th resignation letter, Marks wrote that he was stepping down. His resignation took effect last month. On a national scale, back in Washington, D.C., Republican representative from Florida, Brian Mast, and Portland, Oregon's own Representative Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat, along with 15 other co-sponsors, have reintroduced the Veterans Equal Access Act, or H.R. 2431. This bipartisan legislation expands and facilitates medical cannabis access to military veterans suffering from chronic pain, post-traumatic stress, and other serious medical conditions by allowing physicians affiliated with the Department of Veterans Affairs to recommend cannabis in compliance with state laws. Presently, healthcare providers in the VA system are forbidden from making medical cannabis recommendations, even in states where cannabis is legal for medical use. This prohibition forces many military veterans to seek the advice of private and often expensive out-of-network physicians. Veterans are increasingly turning to medical cannabis as an effective alternative to opioids and other conventional medications. Oregon regulators issued the state's first business license under the state's historic psilocybin therapy program last week, or magic mushrooms, according to some. The licensee, Satori Farms PDX LLC, received its license to begin manufacturing psilocybin products from the Oregon Psilocybin Services, a branch of the Oregon Health Authority, last Wednesday. Oregon's medical psilocybin program formally launched this January after voters approved the system during the 2020 election. Psilocybin, the psychedelic substance found in magic mushrooms, has shown promise in treating severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, end-of-life anxiety among the terminally ill, and some mental health conditions. While the substance remains outlawed at a federal level, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, granted psilocybin mushrooms breakthrough therapy status for major depressive disorders in 2018, which led to clinical trials. Oregon Psilocybin Services, part of the Oregon state government, has warned the program could be slow to come online, as regulators must first consider applications for 4 different types of licenses: manufacturing, laboratories to test it, service centers, and facilitators to help mushroom users and supervise their trips. Earlier this month also marked the culmination of the first ever psilocybin training program by Portland-based Inner Trek, which teaches students how to accompany psilocybin patients during their psychedelic experiences. Our last story tonight comes from Kentucky. Kentucky becomes the 38th state to enact comprehensive medical cannabis access. Democratic Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky signed legislation into law last week legalizing the production, distribution, and use of medical cannabis by authorized patients. Kentucky is the 38th state to enact comprehensive medical cannabis access legislation. Today's an incredible victory for Kentucky. For years, Kentuckians have been calling for medical cannabis legalization, and now they'll have the freedom to safely access regulated therapeutic products right in Kentucky. While there's still work to be done, this is a historic step for Kentucky patients. And our late great friend, Gatewood Galbraith, is smiling down upon his home state. That's the end of our Hemp News segment for tonight. Now we go into our interview with Alison Draisin. Alison is a therapist, and she'll be talking about psilocybin and cannabis therapy and her work and our work together at cannabis judging events. Then after that, we have a 16-minute video from Roar Mikkelsen in Oslo, Norway, talking about their civil disobedience and attempt to change the cannabis laws in the Nordic country of Norway. So stay tuned for another exciting show. If you or a loved one are looking for a doctor who can help you obtain a medical marijuana permit, then we have doctors all over the country who can help you. So just call us at 503 235 4606. That's 503 235 4606. So here's our interview with Alison Draisin. I hope you like it and work to restore hemp. I'd like to welcome Alison Draisin on Cannabis Common Sense. Thanks for coming on, Alison.
Thank you for having me.
We met at the Jalisco Cup several years ago, but I figured it'd be great to get you on. I know you're going to be in Portland next week for the Cannabis Science Conference. What are you going to be presenting on there?
I'm going to be presenting on ketamine assisted psychotherapy in an integrative medical model. I work at the Ames Institute, and so several of my colleagues are going to come down and we're going to talk about the different roles we play in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
All right. Tell our audience about your background, please.
Background. So I got a master's back in the early 90s in Philadelphia in art psychotherapy. I have been around cannabis since I was 14, as a user, as a provider, as a grower, and it kind of led me, that was just part of who I was. Um, and it was the thread throughout my life. I decided to move to Seattle to pursue a doctorate in clinical psychology in the early 2000s. It
That
was
at University of Washington?
no, at Washington School of Professional Psychology.
Okay.
And then during my last, I was in there for like five years. I was working on my dissertation, and I had a neighbor. I grew cannabis, and I had a neighbor who was dying of cancer, and his wife came over and said, "I smell what you're growing." And at first I was like, and then she's like, "No, no, no." She's like, "I love it." She's like, "My husband is dying of cancer. Can you help him use it? Can you make him edibles? We're just trying to make him more comfortable." And that's kind of how I started making edibles for my edible company, Edilu's. And you and I actually, I have met you at HempFest prior to Jalisco Cup, but HempFest is usually so wild and busy,
Yeah.
that
We
it's
do so
sometimes it's
many at
like
once.
ships passing in the speakers backstage. And so I've seen the amazing work that you've been doing all of these years as well with your beautiful wife. And so I was at HempFest doing my thing because I've spoken for over a decade at HempFest. I should say I won a few High Times awards with my edible company, and that afforded me an open door to judging cannabis cups. And I started traveling the world, Amsterdam, in the States. I did Denver, SoCal, NorCal, Oregon, of course, and Washington, multiple years in a row. And then that led me, actually, my relationship with Mike Bafari from HempFest through Donnie Warshafter led me to the Jalisco Cup, which is where I got a chance to know you and your wife better over some volcano hits and judging some cannabis. And we got to experience some of the amazing things up there in the hills of Guadalajara.
Yeah. Yeah, it was neat.
And then at around 2018, after medical had died, because I was really about medical. That was my jam. I liked helping people. When medical kind of died in Washington, I didn't have a place. So I had always been doing private practice, even as I was running the edible company, keeping my license, current. And somehow Dr. Sunil Agarwal found out, and he approached me at HempFest and said, "Hey, I'm starting this company called Ames Institute. I want you to join us where we can do cannabis and psychedelic work." And he's like, "You can do whatever you want." And I was like, "Okay, I'm in." And I've been there for the
That's
last 5 years.
all
Um,
right.
we have done amazing work with cannabis assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And, we're at the forefront of a lot of work with psilocybin and end of life work. And And I still go around and do cannabis education and judge cannabis cups. And that's kind of currently what I'm doing. I speak at conferences, I work and I see patients, and I enjoy the plant, and I enjoy the fungi.
All right. So you must be interested or in line with what's going on with the new education and clinics that are, I don't know of any that are open. Maybe there's one or two that have opened now.
I
But
actually am a teacher for, I teach basic counseling skills at the Synaptic Institute, which is an Oregon accredited psilocybin training facility. And we just, in February, we had our first cohort that graduated. And it's, it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out. It is going to be expensive for not only the providers from their training and having to pay the facility charges and having to pay for the product, and as well as their education, but I think that's going to be expensive for the clients who choose to embark on it, just because in the beginning everything is just so costly.
yeah,
So
how are they providing psilocybin? Are there licensed psilocybin
yes,
providers here in the
yes,
state, and the health division is
yes.
supervising those?
Absolutely. Yes, there are growers, there are distributors, there are facilities where clients have to use a particular facility, just like the therapist, or I shouldn't say therapist because not all of them, I would say providers or guides, must affiliate themselves with a facility, and the yearly costs could be upwards of $20,000 a year just to ensure to have a place. And then you have to contract with a provider of the mushrooms. And so, we all know that mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest literally grow in our backyards.
Yeah.
And so it's strange to think of, charging someone 1 to 2 thousand or even
Where
more
it's growing
dollars.
cubensis though, right? And
It-
cubensis is the native to the Northwest, but
Um,
it's definitely the variety that's grown indoors the most.
It definitely is. There's a bunch of different varietals, but what's grown, at least down up in the Washington area, and I think in Oregon as well, is the cyans, and then
Right?
on the coast
Yeah,
near
the
Astoria,
only ones that taste good.
yeah, I don't think any of them it
I
tastes
had
good.
my year of the mushroom. It was back like 1983, and I picked a lot of mushrooms.
Cyans.
Science.
There's another psychedelic called ovioids, and ovioids bloom in the fall and in the spring. And then you have the Azzies, which are on the Oregon and Washington coast, between Astoria and like Longview area on the coast. And those are the most potent mushrooms that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I
It,
would pick. I had a spot on the Quinault Indian Reservation, right on the coast, that would just produce pounds every morning.
that's
And so
awesome.
you could literally see the ocean and while you were picking them. So
Oh, it's so beautiful. We live in a wonderful place.
yeah, yeah. I was younger then, but tell me about your work with the therapists or the guides in training. So the for our audience who doesn't know, we passed a psilocybin initiative here a few years ago, and a number of people, including a friend of mine, Dr. Rachel Knox, have been promulgating rules on how to implement this, and they've starting in January, right? They started training guides,
Mhm.
and now the guides are graduating. You said you had your first class
The
in
trainings actually started last fall, but the law switched over in January so that when they graduated in February, they were all ready to go. And you have licensed facilities where that's where the journey must occur, and you have licensed providers, and licensed producers, and it's an interesting system. I'm fascinated to watch and see how it goes. Washington, we just passed a bill that was supposed to be our psilocybin bill, but they turned it into an advisory committee so that we can begin to explore in our state how it's working in Oregon to determine if we want something in our state like that, which we do. maybe some shifts and changes so that it's I'm all about access to all people and not just people who can, have pay big bucks.
Yeah, this is going to be something that's cost prohibitive for most people. And,
It,
when Governor Jerry Brown in California about 4 years ago would not sign the marijuana legalization regulations, it was because it denied people the opportunity to use marijuana in state parks. And Jerry Brown, to his credit, said that people have a God-given right to smoke a joint on the beach. And so he sent it back to the legislature. And so I think with all entheogens, mushrooms too, that things that, don't poison anyone really, that uh, people have a God-given right to use these things and to do it on the beach.
and to do it on the beach.
Therapists are going to try to do that, to do it on the beach or something.
There's something called ecotherapy, which is about using therapy practices outside in nature. And so I actually had several of those in the cohort that I taught in, and their plan is to work with a facility that also has some sort of outdoor nest to it so that they can engage in ecotherapy. What I'm really fascinated to see is what's happening with the black market, or excuse me, let's call it the alternative market or the underground market, whichever name you want, because it's so
Well,
expensive.
you saw what happened with the store that was here for a couple of months. They advertised, they put their sign out, magic mushroom, psilocybin.
Loaded.
People were lined around the block to get into the place till the police closed them down about a month ago. And now those guys are being prosecuted. I don't know the details of that, but
It's really sad to me because, like, anyone should have access to this, and the fact
yeah.
that it got such an acclaimed status where it had patrons wanting to wrap around the block, that tells you that people really want this medicine. I have little old ladies that come to me with Michael Pollan's book, dog eared, and they're like, "Help me do this." And I'm like, "Well, legally, I can't do that, but there's lots of YouTube videos." And then these little old ladies come back and they've made their own monotubs and they're growing their own cubensis and they've started microdosing and their lives have taken dramatic shifts and they're happy and it's it's hard, when I see big pharma trying to block some of this stuff, but then I see the other side of it where these, you know, um, people you would never have imagined that are just trying to seek solace and joy in the last stage of their life. God bless them. They deserve it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of its use as palliative care for people with terminal illnesses, has a long history. I mean, Aldous Huxley wrote a book back in the 50s about his use of what was it? It wasn't psilocybin, it was mescaline.
Mescaline. Okay.
Uh, uh, in terms of his end of life process, and so it's been used in that, going back to prehistoric times, obviously. I met with someone just yesterday, in fact, a fellow by the name of Brian, who has filed a petition to legalize and regulate mushroom sales. And so I don't know how that's going to work out for him. I recommended, you need at least $1 million. If you're going to do a statewide, Oregon's the cheapest place by far to do a statewide initiative. But if you're going to do one, you need at least $1 million. And so
You need some money.
anything else, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And so we'll see where that goes. I mean,
I'm I'm seeing a lot of people from cannabis
huh?
switching over. I'm seeing a lot of people that were in the cannabis market switching over into the mushroom market.
Yeah, I've seen that as well in Colorado and here. And then, the black market farmers market type atmospheres. There's a lot
Hmm.
of off market cannabis and psilocybin at those sorts of events. So,
Yes, they have those in California too, down in LA.
uh-huh.
The market types like we used to have long ago, the cannabis markets.
Yeah, yeah. There were a number of those for cannabis before they
I,
allowed dispensaries. But
I miss those old days.
well, things keep developing. That's for sure. That's for sure. So at this science conference, do you want to go into more details about your presentation for our audience? Just to
Sure. I mean, I'm doing a panel presentation with two naturopaths and another psychotherapist, and we are going to talk about our prospective roles. One of the things that I do is I'm also in charge of the provider training program. So we have a lot of providers that come to Ames from really all across the country to do training with us, as we were actually one of the first clinics in the country about 5 years ago to offer wraparound psychotherapy with ketamine services, meaning that we are not like an IV clinic where we connect you to a line and leave you in a room. We work with you from beginning to end to really support anything that comes from peeling back the layers of the onion and helping you adjust and work through those things. We also work with people's therapists. A lot of those therapists come to see me to participate in the provider training program, and then they also continue. I've got ones who've sat with me through our provider training program and have gone on to take coursework at IPI or CIIS, both of which are accredited psychedelic assisted psychotherapy training centers. And so it's very lovely because I feel like more people definitely need to be doing this psychedelic work. There's a lot of pain in our society, and the success that I've seen using psychedelics as a therapy healing tool is so great that I don't do regular psychotherapy or talk therapy any longer. I'll only do psychedelic assisted because I like my clients to find success and I like them to find happiness and joy. And just talking about the same things every week over and over again don't necessarily make shifts, but the psychedelic work does, and it is amazing.
I remember Cary Grant was particularly famous for using LSD before it became illegal in terms of working with this psychiatrist. I don't know, have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard that Cary Grant did.
Yeah,
But
Cary Grant,
there's
took 100 LSD trips, according to what he said, and corresponded with Tim Leary too. Before he kind of told Tim Leary about it, Tim Leary went to him to get information before Tim Leary really got into it.
That's really cool. I also heard, I think it was in the How to Change Your Mind book, that the gentleman who came up with the 12 steps, the AA program,
Yeah,
that he did it while he was on LSD,
I've heard that too. I've heard that too.
which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, you know, cannabis was traditionally used as an exit drug. I, like Don Wertschafter, who's bought a lot of my collection recently. I still have some, but and I'm glad he just opened his museum in Ohio. I'm proud of that. And
Oh, wonderful.
so, but I collect antique medical marijuana containers, and many of them on cannabis tinctures or solid cannabis, powdered cannabis extract. They say it's for patients who are withdrawing from opiates, cocaine, chloroform, and for others with delirium tremens. So it was a common exit drug for people who had more serious addictions, and it was been recognized that way again back to prehistoric times. So
It's amazing. I love that you collect those vials. I've seen some of Donnie's photographs of the different vials that he has, and it's because we have up in Dockside that they have part
yeah,
of his
I
cannabis
was
museum
there
there
the
too.
day he opened that back. Well, it was in conjunction with the Hemp Fest there in Dockside.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And now
Um,
you get around. You've been all over South America. I've been watching you and your wife.
Sure, I got
Um,
to go to Machu Picchu in October with Donnie and Mila Janssen and Mike Bafari and a few of our other friends. But
oh yes. Have you
Mike
been traveling?
Mike and Don, we all went to Thailand, which was pretty exciting. I had
That was
been there
amazing.
Yeah, it was that was just hemp, industrial hemp is what it focused on, even though they've legalized the recreational market in Thailand as well. And there are a lot of stores selling cannabis. It's very expensive
Mm.
though, and a lot of it's imported from America, apparently. So
Wow.
yeah, that's what I
Didn't know that.
yeah.
Your volcano probably has some miles on it.
Yes, it has a lot of miles on it. It's true.
That's amazing. Seen many countries.
That's true. That's true. I always carry it, as you know, almost everywhere. I did not take it to El Salvador, um, and I did not take it to South Korea. But
There reason why you didn't take it to El Salvador?
yeah, in El Salvador, 5 grams will get you 20 years. And I was there to visit a medical patient who was in prison for about an ounce of extracts and an ounce of flour. And
Oh, wow.
we had a press conference and made a lot of media attention in El Salvador, which is the smallest country in Central America, and but also one of the most violent. So there are several countries in Central America you definitely don't want to be caught with cannabis in it. El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are those. It's not so bad in Belize and Costa Rica, Panama, but and it's legal in Colombia. So uh, it's an interesting, changing environment. That's for sure.
Is
But
the museum still in Colombia, in Medellin?
the the museum is actually a hotel. It's a guest house, and it's
Okay.
not in or near Medellin. It's near Cali, but it's in.
Right.
Uh, it's about a 3-hour drive out of Cali in an indigenous area called the Cauca, and there's been I had a lot of people tell me when I was there last summer not to go, but I went ahead and went, and they treated me like royalty when I was there. They did a bunch of dances for me and our group, and I met with the tribal kid. We're talking about going and helping build some hempcrete buildings there. So they have a lot of waste. They
I love
they have
that.
about I think it's more than 1 million acres of cannabis under cultivation in the Cauca. It's very inexpensive there, but they have a lot of cannabis stem waste. So we're talking about taking that and using it to make hempcrete buildings and develop a hemp industry. Even
That
though,
is
yeah, it's what they're already doing. So we'll see how that works out. But Donnie has a hotel there in Toribio, and Toribio is the Nazca people, the Nazca Nation, and indigenous First Nation group there in Colombia, and
okay.
the the Nasa people have had conflicts with the sugarcane growers historically as well. And so, the whole paramilitary 55-year civil war there, which ended maybe 7 years ago, but didn't really, it keeps flaring up. And so I went, I didn't have any problems, but, I understand some people have. But the hotel is still there, the Cannabis Museum Hotel in Toribio. And it's pretty nice. That's the only time I had seen it, because when I had been there in 2016, it wasn't there yet. He didn't build it till 2018. So now,
That's so cool.
yeah. No, I've been blessed to have a number of paid trips to go travel around.
I love watching all your travels. I think it's
And now I don't
wonderful.
have anything on the horizon. Last year we traveled so much. So but that's okay. I need to take care of my home base here. I'm doing that.
Some downtime.
When you're here for the Cannabis Science Conference, you can stop in and visit.
Yeah.
The volcano is right here on the table, and
Take some
Teresa's got it
puffs.
right now. So, as usual.
Hi, Teresa.
Anyway, so after the Cannabis Science Conference, what comes next?
Lots of concerts this year. Seems
Uh-huh.
like everyone's making up for COVID when there were no concerts. I have concerts all summer, including Snoop and Wiz Khalifa and the Pixies and The Cure and Depeche Mode, some old school 80s music. And I think I was gonna do the conference in Denver, but it's just I'm busy at work and I'm trying to balance work life. That's my goal this year is to balance work and life. And so I'm my goal is to spend more time with my family this year and do things that I like.
With work, what can you tell us about? And for people who are interested, how could they hook up with your your?
They can amesinstitute.net is where that they can find out more about our cannabis and our psychedelic assisted psychotherapy program. And we've been working on a lot of things. We had recently the first case that we knew of where we had hospice pay for an end of life patient to go on a journey in the hospice facility was pretty monumental. And I am working on writing that paper up with a co-therapist who's a nurse, actually. She was the one who brought the meds, and I did the psychotherapy piece, and we worked together. And so we're going to write that up, to help others in other states work with their hospice associations so that more people who are at end of life can have access to going on a ketamine assisted psychotherapy journey and begin to have some acceptance and some existential shifts so that they can prepare and welcome death. It's there's something called death with divinity, and death with divinity is actually from like the Timothy Leary and the Owsley times, where they would actually give LSD to people who were dying, and so that as they were dying they could go off on a journey, if you will. We haven't gotten there yet, but to me, with death with dignity that both of us have in Oregon and in my state of Washington, I'm hoping it's only a matter of time that people will be able to have the option for death with divinity as well as death with dignity. But end of life work is something that is really important to me, and that's what my research focus is going to be for this year.
So, in terms of the cannabis and ecotherapy, how does can you enlighten us a little bit more about that process?
That well, ecotherapy is about is outdoors. It's wherever you are, whether it's a park. I know of clinicians, in San Francisco that'll take people to parks. Well, they'll partake, and then they have a session. Each person, when it comes to like cannabis assisted psychotherapy, does things differently. Something that we pride ourselves on at Ames is that we really try to link the cultivar or strain with the appropriate goal or ailment that's going on. And regardless of whether we did it outside, which would be fantastic if we were able to do that at Ames, but presently we cannot. Presently we are in office, but we're about to buy our own office building, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to create a little oasis outside of it to be able to have some sort of connection with the earth as we are supporting our clients with either the use of cannabis or psychedelics. But that's what we're looking for in the future. As far as the cannabis piece, like you were talking about, we one of the things that like we do in matching cultivars with the goal, for some people they get very paranoid or anxious when they use cannabis, and so a goal might be to explore that anxiety and to literally take them into that point of paranoia and anxiety and talk them through it and help them and support them in finding out the root of that anxiety. The other piece could be just using something a little more relaxing that's high in myrcene or high in beta caryophyllene, some one of the heavier terpenes, to kind of allow for relaxation for people who are a little bit more high strung and need to relax in order to peel back the layers of the onion and explore and be vulnerable.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Hopefully, there'll be more and more of that. I mean, it sounds like being sitting on a couch in a dark room, my opinion.
Yeah, I would much rather be sitting at a beach with my therapist and smoking, a tailored cultivar for my ailment and working through it than stuck in a building without a window. Absolutely.
Of course. Um,
You know,
is there anything else that we should talk about that I've?
I would love to talk to you about the Jalisco Cup
Okay.
and the experiences that we had. I know you've gone back for other Jalisco Cups,
They've been
but what was
back. I had some sponsors who paid for our trip last year, and they gave us the tickets to come there the year before that. They li- they like us there, so we're
That's
thankful.
beautiful.
Yeah,
I love those people there. I made a wonderful connection with Basa, who
yeah,
is one of their resident seed guys, and then Eric from Lalva Smoke Shop.
yeah, yeah,
I actually went to I went to Sayula Growers was one of the growers that we had met that year at Jalisco, and I went to I went to the Sayula Growers Cup
Ah,
this past last year.
uh,
And that was interesting because it was in Sinaloa, and while Sinaloa, there's a lot of political unrest there, and so it was an interesting journey. I feel like I educated quite a few people, even some cartel guys that had come through and wanted me to critique their cannabis, which I'm welcome. I will always critique someone's cannabis, and give them an honest opinion, which is what I felt that we did at the Jalisco Cup.
uh-huh.
I What was your what did you enjoy the most? Did you enjoy edibles, smokables, or concentrates?
I like the smokables myself. I mean, um, the edibles were good, and I've seen an evolution of improvement year to year. Yeah, I was there. In fact, on my last trip, it started going to Guadalajara and the Jalisco Cup. Then I went from there to Medellin for Expo Mediweed, and from there I went to Thailand. So it was kind of a very exciting round the world.
I love it.
Uh,
I love
but
it. I think
yeah,
that's wonderful.
yeah,
Because you
and-
get out there and you get to educate people on all the amazing things that you know about the plant, as well as what you know about regulation and legalization, so that you can help other countries further this process that we've been fighting for years, decades.
it's a blessing to be invited and honored in that regard. And I got to hang out with our friends, like Don and Michelito or Mike, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
him. But anyway, so if people want to reach you or find out more, they go to the Ames Institute. Was it .com?
.net,
Dot,
amesinstitute.net, and you can also find me on Instagram as Dr. Alison D, and that's DrAlisond. So I'm a 1L Allison, and that's where you can find me on Instagram. And then you can also message me through at Ames, or call and leave a message, and I will get back to people who may have questions, especially if they have questions about the different programs that we have at Ames. I happily do 30-minute consults for people who have questions or just want to know more.
all right. Well, thank you, Allison. We've had Alison Draisin from the Ames Institute and Jalisco Cup and many other places. So, and what was the name of your edible company?
It was Edeluz.
Edeluz.
Edibles.
And so thanks for all your years of work on this as well.
Thank you so much for
And
having me. I always love chatting with you.
a great pleasure's mine. Keep working to restore Hemp, and we'll see you maybe here next week. Happy 420.
Thank you. You too.
The Alliance for Rights-Oriented Drug Policy, AROD, and the Patient Association for Safe Cannabis Use, PASCAN, invite to a celebration for human rights outside the Director of Public Prosecution's office on the 20th of April 2023 at 14 o'clock. There will be music, appeals, cannabis plants, and responsible citizens. The purpose for the rally is to ensure accountability in drug policy, because several reports indicate that the disproportionate use of force continues. Since 2002, 4 Norwegian reports highlight a conflict between administrative law and rights law, where human rights have come out short, and it is uncertain whether the rule of law accommodates a cannabis prohibition. Instead of reducing supply and demand, drug prohibition has resulted in more crime, stigmatization, suffering, disease, and mortality. More and more countries are therefore regulating the cannabis market to protect public health, while Norway continues to ignore the demand for human rights analysis. Such an analysis weighs the relationship between ends and means and ensures that the law is suitable for pursuing a legitimate purpose. Since 2009, the Ministry of Justice and the Director of Public Prosecutions have been informed of the need for such analysis, but no clarification has been made. Rather than ensuring the quality of the use of force in the field of drugs, Norwegian politicians continue to punish on disproved premises, and this is particularly objectionable after the report of the Royal Commission, which showed that public panic has shaped the drug policy. To the extent that panic has been a factor, rights will not be sufficiently emphasized, and civil society has had several human rights rallies to promote effective minority protection. The demonstration outside the Director of Public Prosecution's office will be the third, and it is hoped that the Director will accept responsibility. The protest takes place outside the Director of Public Prosecution's office because the government and the Storting use public health as justification for a policy that is based on double standards and that makes things worse. Instead of being a professional secretariat for political leadership, the Ministry of Justice has taken on the role of a political secretariat, and human rights violations continue because the minister has not taken care of constitutional obligations. The commitment to professionalism means that the civil service must make known the necessary professional objections to all types of cases as early as possible. But for 14 years, the ministry has turned a blind eye to allegations of a connection between the drug policy and the arbitrary persecution of the past, and guarantees of legal certainty are neglected. Section 102 of the Norwegian Constitution puts a responsibility on the state to justify punishment, but the defense of drug prohibition is weak, and the minister has not informed the Storting on the need to illuminate a blind spot. In this way, the Ministry of Justice has contributed to political arguments being given a false professional tone, as well as political positions being presented as the best or the only acceptable solutions, even if other solutions are professionally acceptable. Rule of law guarantees dictate that the ministry must promote the least intrusive solution, and that there must be a credible relationship between ends and means. But for 20 years, Norwegian expert committees have confirmed the lack of a basis for punishment in drug policy, and for over 100 years, international reports have done the same. In 2016, Minister of Justice Anders Anundsen attracted attention after an interview on NRK's Folkeopplysningen, where all the Ministry of Justice could produce as support for its case was an unpublished master's thesis from a Swedish medical student, and the commitment to professionalism has not been met. The civil service must facilitate the efficient use of resources and carry out its work as professionally as possible, but it is difficult to imagine a policy that has greater moral, human, and financial costs, as well as less goal achievement, than the drug policy. After 60 years of punishment, the evidence shows that the more the police intervene in the drug market, the more violence, desperation, overdoses, and insecurity occur in the local environment. So how can the ministry be said to have taken care of professionalism and continuity over time? Why is panic, and a policy that seizes a large part of the Treasury's funds, continued, when the Ministry of Health's review of the Royal Commission's report makes it clear that no research supports punishment? Should Norway have a more repressive criminal policy than former police states such as Portugal and Thailand? AROD has a list of such questions that must be answered for drug prohibition to continue. The response decides the merits of the prohibition quest, and yet the Minister of Justice does not follow up, and the Supreme Court and the Storting protect the drug law from inquiry. The damage to the rule of law is profound, as all branches of the government has failed in their professional responsibilities. For 40 years, criminology and the sociology of law have noted the hunt for scapegoats as the engine of drug policy, and in the last 30 years, lawyers have increasingly understood the same. Several reports therefore testify to the failure of the legislative to protect the rights of drug users, but public panic and the deprioritizing of rights law ensure that the Constitution is ignored. All branches of the Norwegian government ensure that an unlawful culture is perpetuated, and an analogy to the debate about banning fireworks may be useful. It is difficult to tell whether a ban on fireworks would work as intended. Good intentions can therefore defend the introduction of a prohibition, but if for 60 years we criminalized fireworks to reduce harm, and this has not reduced use, but has resulted in more crime, division, death, and injuries. If reports for 20 years have pointed out the problems with prohibition, and the law has done so much damage that world leaders refer to it as genocide and the end of democracy, is it justifiable to rule out change? Can the government take it for granted that a prohibition of fireworks is within the framework of human rights? And can a demand for constitutional review of the law be ignored? If so, what is left of the Constitution's framework and protection? We ask because drug users have sought the protection of the rule of law for 15 years, and because the issue is no different for the drug law. Section 94 of the Norwegian Constitution states that no one must be imprisoned or deprived of their liberty in any other way except in statutory cases and in the manner prescribed by the law. The deprivation of liberty must be necessary and not constitute a disproportionate intervention. but the Criminal Law Commission stated in 2002 that over 6 years imprisonment for cannabis offenses was disproportionate. How can the current criminal framework be defended when more and more European countries regulate similar activities? Solid reflection and good answers are required. Section 98 of the Norwegian Constitution states that all are equal before the law. No person must be subjected to unfair or disproportionate discrimination. But double standards and extremism in the drug field are a fact. Supply and demand remains distorted into a victim and aggressor context, because only in this way can the state disempower users and punish sellers. But the integrity of the political process and the legal system suffer as a result of public panic and the undermining of rights law. Suffering is also frequent among the punished citizens, including their relatives, and Section 102 of the Constitution requires the state authorities to ensure protection of personal integrity. This is the aim of our civil disobedience on the 20th of April. It was with good reason that Professor of Criminology Niels Christie in 1996 referred to those responsible for drug policy as fanatics, and maintained the importance of keeping them under as strong humanistic control as possible. It was also with good reason that the Criminal Law Commission questioned the legislators' moral compass and recommended stronger judicial control. But due to public panic and the administrative law gone wrong, the legislative, judicial, and executive powers have failed in their duty to protect rights. In this context, the Director of Public Prosecutions has an independent responsibility, and we offer a new opportunity to ensure the rule of law. We say new opportunity because the Director of Public Prosecutions has had several, such as AROD's civil disobedience outside the main police station in 2021, and AROD and Pascan's Cannabis Fest on Eidsvollsplass on the 22nd of September, 2022. The purpose of these events was to ensure accountability in drug policy, but the political majority will not consider the advantages and disadvantages of a regulated market compared to a criminal market. Nevertheless, the country's laws must be based on the principles of a rule of law. According to Section 89 of the Constitution, the courts have a duty to provide clarification, and the Director of Public Prosecutions can promote the issue by taking responsibility for the rule of law. Since the Supreme Court rejected the drug user's right to judicial review in 2010 by giving politicians free rein, it became clear in 2019, with the report of the Royal Commission, that the legislature had not earned the trust that the Supreme Court placed as a basis. The result is that around 500,000 criminal cases are constitutionally disputed. But despite the fact that it is the police's responsibility to be a part of society's overall efforts to promote and strengthen citizens' legal security, safety, and general welfare, and that every public prosecutor must promote the administration of justice in accordance with the values and principles on which the rule of law is based, including legal certainty, equality before the law, and the fundamental freedom and autonomy of the individual, the police and prosecuting authority would not support rights when AROD's civil disobedience went before the courts. Instead, the police prosecutor and state attorney claimed that it is outside the court's duties to assess whether Norwegian drug policy is correct or sensible on a more general level, and on this basis, Norwegian law departed from 200 years of legal development. The Supreme Court did not question that Sturla Henriksbo, a state attorney and politician from the Christian Democratic Party, KRF, set aside the Constitution to protect the party's drug policy from criticism. Instead, without justification, the Supreme Court's Appeals Committee on the 20th of December 2022 overlooked a legal tradition dating back to 1822, and in this way the drug law was shielded from a human rights analysis. That the courts took this step, knowing that the defense's appeal invalidated all the reasons for the conviction, testifies to the power of public panic. This phenomenon can only survive as long as there is no integrity in the justice system, and AROD has asked the Committee on Scrutiny and Constitutional Affairs to secure the rule of law. It was the legislators' will when codifying the right of judicial review in Section 89 of the Constitution to ensure minority protection, but the courts have overlooked guarantees of the rule of law, and it is important that the Director of Public Prosecutions takes action. Not only do cannabis users have the right not to be unfairly discriminated against from alcohol users, but the police have the right to provide better services, the prosecution and the courts have the right to build on sound ethics, families have the right not to be torn apart by dysfunctional and overly intrusive laws, and the nation has a right not to be divided by an enemy image that impairs sound judgment. It is becoming increasingly obvious that the hunt for scapegoats undermines the integrity of the legal system, and that society has the right to be free from a policy that depends on double standards to exist. For this reason, A-Rod offers another opportunity for legal development and value protection. Previous actions have been devastating for the Norwegian authorities' credibility. We have seen that the state would rather set aside our legal tradition than deliver on legal promises, and the police and prosecuting authorities should appreciate a new opportunity to stand up for the rule of law. It is in this context that the Director of Public Prosecutions is invited to legal proceedings. Before the prosecution objected to the clarification of human rights in 2022, A-Rod had 3 days in Oslo District Court to present relevant evidence of violations. It was the police's reluctance to act on their duties that caused the prosecutor to request that all evidence be rejected, and the Director of Public Prosecutions must discipline his subordinates and do away with uncertainty. If the director is serious about his interest in handling criminal cases in line with humanistic considerations, the director must lead by example, and this means that the damage caused by the prosecution must be offset. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission is recommended, but before this, the Storting should promote impeachment. If the Supreme Court cannot explain why the justices at the court prioritize the economic rights of ship owners and the property industry over the right to freedom and self-determination of those persecuted in the drug policy, the Supreme Court must take responsibility for opposing the legislator's intention. And if the Minister of Justice cannot show that the professional responsibility for the law is being maintained, the Storting must ensure that the rule of law is secured. As the Director of Public Prosecutions has made clear, it is no longer possible to build drug policy on a drug-free ideal. Instead, as the Committee for Conduct, Integrity, and Conflict of Interest in Law Enforcement points out, we live in a time of transition, and human rights must be emphasized. What we have seen of legal development in previous civil disobedience cases has been frightening for supporters of a liberal rule of law, and on the 20th of April 2023, A-Rod will hand over sufficient cannabis to warrant court proceedings. The police themselves choose how the handover will take place, but we hope that the Director of Public Prosecutions will receive the seizure with an assurance that uncertainty about the use of force will be taken seriously. This means that the Director of Public Prosecutions undertakes to provide clarification on whether Sections 231 and 232 of the Penal Code mark an unreasonable distinction between legal and illegal substances, whether this is a case of arbitrary persecution, and how the damage the rule of law can be undone. The event will take place in the park area outside Oslo Cathedral, closest to Stortorvet 2, where the Director of Public Prosecutions has his office. We remember a time in the 1980s when committed professionals sat down in chains to protect a river, and we hope that the fight for rights in drug policy provides fertile ground for similar activism. Not only can several hundred lives be saved if society moves from a drug-free ideal to a zero vision for overdose death, but we can halve the number of inmates in Norwegian prisons. We can honor our founding fathers in not accepting a mockery of law, and by lifting up the Constitution, we strengthen the nation's only map and compass out of public panic. We hope to see you on this day and appreciate all your support and commitment for those persecuted in the drug policy.